She promised to arrive on July 14th, but when the stagecoach never came, Nathan Cole received a telegram that stopped his heart. Wagon wrecked in Devil's Throat Canyon. No survivors expected. 4 days. His mail-order bride had been lying somewhere in that desert for 4 days. Everyone told him to let it go. The doctor said no one could survive that long with those injuries. But Nathan couldn't shake the words from her last letter. Whatever gets in the way, I will overcome it. So he rode into that canyon with his 6-year-old daughter. And what he found there would haunt him forever. A woman with both legs shattered, hands worn down to the bone. She had dragged herself 20 feet across that rocky ground using nothing but her arms, because she refused to break her promise to a little girl she had never even met. But here's the question that will keep you listening until the very end. Can a love that begins in desperation survive? Or will the ghosts of her past destroy everything they're trying to build? This story will remind you that the right person won't just love you at your best. They'll search for you at your worst and choose you anyway. If you believe in the kind of love worth crawling through hell for, drop a comment and tell me you're here. Subscribe so you never miss a story that speaks to your soul. The sun over Wyoming was a cruel, unblinking eye, cooking the wooden platform Nathan Cole stood on. The letter in his pocket was soft as cloth from being read and reread. He knew the words by heart. I will be there on the afternoon stage, July 14th. I give you my word, Mr. Cole. Whatever gets in the way, I will overcome it, Eleanor. Well, the 14th had come and gone. So had the 15th. Now the 16th was burning away, and the platform was as empty as his hopes. Papa, Leia's little hand slipped into his. My feet are tired. Nathan looked down at his daughter. 3 days they had come to town. 3 days he watched her hope shrivel up in the heat. I know, little bird. Just a little longer. You said that yesterday, she said, not with anger, just with the plain truth of a child. He didn't have an answer for her. He just stared down the shimmering tracks toward the world where Eleanor Hayes had written those letters. She wrote about being lonely, but purposeful. She wrote about choosing a hard, unknown life over a comfortable cage. She had written once, I am not a pretty woman, Mr. Cole, but I am strong. I can read and write. I can make things grow. And I endure. If you want a decoration, look somewhere else. If you want a partner, I will walk through fire for you. And Lord help him, he believed her. The station master, a skinny fellow named Hewitt, came out of his office holding a telegram like it was a snake. Nathan's gut tightened. Mr. Cole, Hewitt said, swallowing hard. Got a wire. Nathan's hand clamped down on Leia's shoulder. She looked up, sensing the change in him. What's it say? Hewitt glanced at the little girl. Maybe the child ought to. She stays. What's it say? The man unfolded the flimsy paper. Westbound wagon wrecked out in the Badlands. About 20 miles south, near Devil's Throat Canyon. Driver's gone. 3 passengers. He took a breath. It says no survivors expected. Stage was due here on the 14th. Nathan's world went quiet. The 14th. Her arrival date, 20 miles south, 4 days ago. Did it list a passenger? His voice was steady, but his ears were ringing. No names, just the regular route. Leia tugged on his shirt. Papa, what's a wreck? He knelt down to her level. It means something broke, little bird, and the people might need help. Is it the lady, Miss Eleanor? The question hung there in the blazing sun. Life in the small town of Clearwater just kept going on around them. A freight wagon rumbled by. A hammer clanged at the smithy. The bell on the general store door jingled. His world was falling apart, and nobody else even noticed. I don't know, he said softly, but I'm going to find out. Hitt coughed. Mr. Cole, that wire says no survivors. It's been 4 days out there. Then I'll give them a proper burial, Nathan said, standing up. Laya, you'll stay with the Hendersons. No, she said, her face set with a stubbornness he knew all too well. It was her mother's face. I'm coming with you. This is not... You told me, she wrote. Whatever stands between us, I will overcome it. I want to help overcome. Nathan looked at his daughter, just 6 years old and already an expert in loss. His wife, Sarah, had died bringing their second child into the world. For 2 years, it had just been the two of them, living with a quiet sadness that never quite went away. The letters to Eleanor had started as a practical matter, but they became something more. She was smart, and she understood what it meant to be alone. She had written about nursing her parents until they passed, about being a 32-year-old woman who had never made a single choice for herself. Until now, she had written, I choose this, Mr. Cole. I choose you. And now she could be dead in the desert, her first real choice turning into her last. All right, he said, you ride with me. But you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. Do you understand? Laya nodded, serious as a preacher. An hour later, they were riding south. They had 2 horses, water for 3 days, bandages, and a shovel tied to the pack saddle. The green land near the creek gave way to the hard, red country of the Badlands. Laya rode in front of him, her small body tucked against his chest. She was quiet for a long time. Papa? Yes, little bird. If Miss Eleanor is hurt, can we fix her? The question was so full of hope it nearly broke his heart. It assumed they would find her, that she was alive, and that fixing her was even possible. I don't know, he answered honestly, but if she is out there, we will not leave her alone. Mama was alone, Laya said, her voice barely a whisper. When she died, you were gone for the doctor, and I was too little. She was all alone. He had never known she remembered that. He thought she was too young. I was in the house with her, he said. That's not alone. But I didn't know how to help, she whispered, twisting the horse's mane in her little fingers. If Miss Eleanor is hurt, I want to know how to help this time. The sun beat down. He had no words for her, so he just held her a little tighter and kept riding south. They found the canyon as the afternoon shadows grew long. It was a deep cut in the earth with walls that glowed red in the setting sun. And there, at the bottom, they saw it. First they smelled it. Then they saw the broken pieces of the stagecoach. Have you ever seen a promise kept through sheer grit alone? Well, that stagecoach was a pile of busted lumber 50 feet down the canyon slope. It was canted at an angle that told a story of a violent fall. All around it, cargo and bodies were scattered like forgotten toys. I pulled back on the reins and covered my daughter Laya's eyes, but it was too late. I told her to stay with the horses and meant it. Down the slope, the scene was worse up close. 3 men, all gone, but the telegram said 4 people. My heart started pounding. Then I saw 'em. 2 long grooves in the dirt leading away from the wreck. Someone had dragged themselves, both legs broken, using just their arms. I followed those tracks to a shallow cave, and there she was, curled up and trying to disappear into the rock. It was Eleanor Hayes. She was barely hanging on. Her skirt was in tatters, and her legs were bent at angles that turned my stomach. Her hands were worn down to the bone from 4 days of pulling herself across that rough ground. Her face was burnt from the sun, but she was still breathing. I must have said her name out loud because her eyes fluttered open. They were wild with fever. Late, she whispered. I'm late. Promised the 14th. I knelt beside her, afraid to touch her anywhere. Her hand twitched. The little girl, Laya, is she disappointed? That question just broke me. Here she was, dying by inches, and worried about a child she'd never even met. I told her, she's right here. She rode with me to find you. For a second, her eyes cleared. You came, she said. I reckon I gave my word I'd meet you. Then her eyes rolled back and she was gone again. I scrambled back up that slope faster than I thought possible. Leia was standing right where I left her, holding the reins tight. "Is she there?" she asked. "Yes." "Is she gone?" "Not yet," I said, grabbing my medical kit and a blanket. "But she's close. I need you to be brave, Leia." She just gave a firm nod. As the sun went down, we did our best. I cleaned her wounds and dripped water onto her cracked lips. I splintered her legs with some spare kindling. All the while, Leia kept up a soft chatter, talking to Eleanor. "We have a nice ranch, Miss Eleanor. Papa says I can get a kitten. I know how to gather eggs real quiet." Leia's sweet voice filled the air while I faced a hard truth. Eleanor needed a doctor, and the nearest one was in Clearwater, 20 miles of rough country away, a ride that would surely kill her. Eleanor's eyes opened while I was building a travois from branches. "Can't move me," she rasped. "Legs are shattered. You'll kill me." I looked her square in the eye. "You'll die for sure if I leave you here." "Then that's how it ends," she breathed. "I chose this." I pulled the last knot tight. "The hell you're dying in this canyon. You crawled for 4 days to keep your promise to my little girl. I'm not letting you quit now." "Not your decision," she shot back, her eyes blazing with fire. "You wrote me," I said. "You chose me. That means I get a say in this. And I say you live." "Arrogant man," she muttered. I almost smiled. "That's the spirit. Stay mad. Anger will get you farther than hope right now." I gently lifted her onto the sled. She let out one terrible scream, and then passed out from the pain. We started back in the dark. I led my horse, pulling the travois. Leia rode the other horse, silent in the night. I set a slow, steady pace to keep the Jocelyn down. The hours just melted together. Every so often I'd stop to check on Eleanor, to give her a few drops of water. Leia dozed off, trusting her horse to follow me. It was just me, the quiet and the heavy weight of my own promise. 20 miles. She just had to last 20 miles. Dawn found us still 10 miles from town. Eleanor hadn't woken up. Her breathing was shallow and her skin was burning hot. "Papa," Leia whispered. "Is she gonna make it?" I didn't have an answer. "She's fought this long," I said. "So we fight longer." We pushed on through the heat, moving on pure will. Clearwater finally appeared on the horizon. Folks came out of their houses to stare as we came through. A dusty rancher, a broken woman on a sled, and a little girl who looked like she'd seen a war. A fella ran from the depot. "Good Lord, you found her!" I could barely speak. "Get Dr. Morrison. Now!" The next few hours were a blur. The doctor's house, Eleanor's scream as they moved her to a bed, Morrison's grim face. Leia fell asleep in a chair right beside me. Morrison finally came out of the room. He recited her injuries like a list. Both legs broken, 3 ribs cracked, a head injury, infection, and dehydration. "Mr. Cole," he said softly, "I have seen strong men die from half of this. It's a miracle she is alive at all." "Will she live?" I asked. The doctor paused, and in that moment I saw he was as scared as I was. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. You should prepare yourself." But I just shook my head. She crawled through hell to keep a promise. She is not going to die in a clean bed 2 days later. That is not how this story ends. I couldn't leave. I couldn't walk away from the woman who chose me from letters, who dragged her broken body across a desert to keep her word. I just pulled my sleeping daughter into my lap and sat there keeping watch. That night, Eleanor woke up. Her eyes found me in the lamplight. "Still here?" she whispered. I nodded. "Told you, we don't quit on each other." Her fingers twitched on the blanket, just barely moving. Nathan took her hand in his. Her own fingers were torn and raw from 4 long days of clawing at rock. Eleanor's voice was a faint whisper. "Your daughter," she said. "She's a beautiful, brave little girl. You did a good job raising her. She wants to help you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "She said she didn't know how to help when her own mama died, but she wants to learn now." The hope in her voice was a fragile thing. "Then I have to live," she whispered. "I can't let her down." Nathan gently brushed his thumb over her knuckles. "That's right. You made a promise to a little girl who believes in promises. Now it's time to finish what you started." She held his gaze, then gave a single nod. The tiny movement seemed to take all her strength. Her eyes closed again, but her fingers squeezed his for just a moment before she slipped back into unconsciousness. In that quiet room, with Leia asleep on his chest, Nathan listened to Eleanor's steady breathing. Life was going on outside, but in here, everything was different. They were stuck somewhere between losing everything and a new beginning. The promise she had been waiting for had turned into something else. It was a choice Eleanor made every time she refused to give up in that canyon. It was the choice Nathan made when he searched for her against all odds, and it was the choice Leia made when she rode out to help a stranger. Now they would all have to keep choosing, over and over, until their story had an ending. Nathan looked at Eleanor's face. In the lamplight, her fever seemed a little lower. Her breathing was a little easier. It was not a victory, not yet. But it was a chance. It was a single, hard-won chance born from pure grit and stubborn hope. He whispered to her sleeping form, "Stay, please, just stay." In the days to come, through fever and pain, they would all keep fighting. They would keep believing that a promise made is a promise that can be kept. They learned that overcoming something did not mean avoiding the hardship. It meant crawling right through it, inch by painful inch, toward the life you chose, toward home. For 3 days, Eleanor was lost in a fog. Sometimes she was aware, and sometimes she was gone completely. The doctor, Morrison, changed her bandages twice a day. His face grew more worried each time he saw the wounds on her legs. Nathan could only watch from the doorway. "The infection is spreading," Morrison said on the second day, not trying to sugarcoat it. "Especially the right leg. I've cleaned it, but—" "But what?" Nathan asked, his knuckles white as he gripped the doorframe. "But she was in that canyon for 4 days with broken bones. Dirt, blood, who knows what else got in there. I can clean the surface. I can't fight what's in the bone." Leia, who had barely left the house, took her father's hand. She looked up at the doctor with her serious eyes. "What happens if you can't fight it?" Morrison knelt down to her level. "Then Miss Eleanor will get much sicker, little one." He glanced at Nathan, who gave a small nod. "Tell her," he mouthed. The doctor turned back to Leia. "And then her body has to decide if it is strong enough to heal on its own." Leia thought about that. "She is strong," she said. "She crawled for 4 days. That's very strong." "Yes, it is," Morrison said, his eyes a little shiny. "Very strong indeed." But Nathan was learning that strength was not always enough. That night, Eleanor's fever shot up. She tossed and turned, crying out things that made no sense. She spoke of a small house in Baltimore, of parents she cared for, and of a man named Chester who left her for someone younger. She talked about years spent teaching piano to children whose mothers felt sorry for her. "Had to leave," she mumbled through dry, cracked lips. "Had to choose something new. Couldn't be that person anymore." Nathan sat with her, placing cool cloths on her burning forehead and wrists. Morrison had gone home to get some rest, leaving Nathan with strict instructions. "Talk to her," the doctor had said. "Sometimes they can hear you. Give her a reason to fight." So Nathan talked. He told her about his ranch and the creek that never ran dry. He told her about the cabin he built for his wife, Sarah. He talked about Leia's first steps and how she started reading at 4 years old, always hungry for a new story. He told her about the garden that had been empty since Sarah died, and the piano that had been silent for 2 long years. "We need you," he said softly, his hand covering hers. "Not just because Leia needs a mother, because she surely does, but because I need—" He stopped, looking for the right words. I need someone who chose this life. Someone who chose us, knowing how hard it would be. He could feel Eleanor turn her head toward his voice, even with her eyes closed. You knew it would be hard, Nathan went on. Your letter said you wanted a challenge, not comfort. Well, here is your challenge, Eleanor Hayes. This is your chance to prove those were not just words on a piece of paper. Her hand twitched under his. Once, then again. That's right, he whispered. The long night finally gave way to dawn. While the town slept, Nathan sat beside Eleanor watching her fight. He wiped her brow and gave her sips of water, refusing to let the silence win. Then her breathing settled. The raging fever was gone. As the first light touched the window, her eyes opened clear and focused right on him. You stayed, she whispered. Her voice was weak, but it was hers. Where else would I be? He answered softly. Sensible men do not watch over strangers. She rasped. And they do not agree to marry them by mail. He allowed a small smile. Well, it seems we are both past sensible. Her mouth twitched in a weak smile. How long? She asked. 3 days since we found you. 7 since the crash. My daughter, Laya, is in the next room. She has been here the whole time. A flicker of a real smile crossed Eleanor's face before pain took over. My legs? Nathan paused, but her eyes demanded the truth. Both are broken badly. The doctor says the left one might heal clean. He was not so sure about the right. Her voice was steady. It might not heal. I might lose it. Yes, he said. She looked out the window. I crawled 20 feet in 4 days. It felt so far. She made a rough sound. I hardly moved at all. You moved enough, he told her. You survived. For what? She asked. A crippled wife is a bad deal, Mr. Cole. My name is Nathan, he said, the formality stinging. And you will use it. Her eyes met his. Nathan, you hired a helpmate, not an invalid. I release you from our agreement. No, you do not, he said, his voice low and firm. You do not crawl through a desert to keep your word, just to give up now. That is not how this works. This is impossible, she insisted. I cannot run a home. What can you not do? He countered. Survive 4 days with broken legs? You already did the impossible, Eleanor. Do not tell me you cannot do what is hard. He took her hand, his voice softening. I asked for a partner, someone who endures. I care that you kept fighting. That is the woman I want. We will figure out the rest together. Tears of hope and fear slid into her hair. I wanted to arrive looking capable, she whispered. You proved you were capable in that canyon, he said gently. The door opened and Laya walked in, her hair messy from sleep. She looked at Eleanor. You are awake. Papa said you might get better, are you? Eleanor's face softened. I think so, sweetheart. Thanks to your papa and you. I helped, Laya stated simply. Then I owe you my life, Miss Laya. Laya thought for a moment. You do not have to pay it back. Papa says family just helps, because that is what family does. The word family filled the quiet room, a bold claim from a child who knew loss. Eleanor looked at Nathan, her breath catching. He nodded slowly. Yes, Laya said, satisfied. You came all this way to be my new mama. That makes us family, even if you cannot walk yet. The faith in that one word, yet, was astounding. His daughter was choosing to believe. Eleanor squeezed Laya's hand. Then I suppose I had better heal. An hour later, Dr. Morrison arrived. He found his patient awake and arguing about pain medicine. The doctor was relieved but cautious as he checked her injuries. The fever has broken, he said. That is the first good news in days, But you are not out of the woods, Miss Hayes. The right leg is my main concern, he continued. The bones may not heal properly. You must prepare for permanent damage. Eleanor's voice was firm. I am aware. I will adapt. The doctor softened. Recovery will be long and painful. You will need constant care. From the doorway, Nathan spoke. She will have it. Morrison looked between the two of them and nodded. She cannot be moved for a week, maybe 2. After that, she could go to your ranch, but she will need... We will manage, Nathan cut in. Whatever she needs, we will manage. As the doctor was leaving, he paused. Mr. Cole, a word? In the hall, his voice was low. Do you understand what you are taking on? This may not be temporary, Morrison warned. She may never walk without help. I have seen men leave healthy wives over less. She crawled for 4 days to keep her word. Nathan's voice was hard as iron. That tells me everything about her character. She's not a stranger. The doctor studied him, then nodded. You should know the town is talking. They say you are a fool or desperate. Let them talk, Nathan said. They are half right. I am desperate. Desperate for someone who keeps a promise and does not quit when things get hard. If that makes me a fool, then I am a fool. The days that followed found a routine. Nathan worked at the ranch in the mornings, taking care of the animals and fences. Leah stayed with Eleanor. She would talk and talk, read stories out loud, and help change her water with the serious focus of a 6-year-old. In the afternoons, Nathan came back to town. He and Eleanor would talk, getting to know the real people behind the letters they had written. You wrote that you played the piano, Nathan said one day. I taught it for 15 years, she said. Every proper young lady in Baltimore learned their scales from me. Her mouth twisted into a sad smile. I was good enough to teach, but never good enough to perform. The story of my life. You don't think crawling 20 feet with broken legs is exceptional? Nathan asked. That was not exceptional, she replied. That was just being too stubborn to die in a ditch. There is a difference. Is there? Nathan asked, leaning back. Seems to me that plain old grit is the best thing a person can have. Talent is common. Being stubborn enough to see things through is rare. Eleanor looked at him, really looked, seeing the man behind the letters. You believe that? She asked. I do, he said. My Sarah was good at almost everything. But when winter bit hard or the summer was bone dry, she didn't have that fight in her. She had a good heart, but not the kind of toughness it takes to stare this land down and not back away. It was the most he had ever said about his first wife. Eleanor was quiet, understanding that love alone had not been enough. She realized a partnership needed strength as much as it needed softness. The piano at your ranch, she said after a moment. Does it still play? Haven't laid a hand on it in 2 years. Probably needs a good tuning. When I can sit up for more than 10 minutes, she said, I'd like to play it. When you can sit up, he told her, you can do whatever you damn well please. Eleanor let out a real laugh, surprised by his intensity. You are not what I expected, Nathan Cole. Neither are you, Eleanor Hayes, he said. But I'm starting to think that's a good thing. 2 weeks later, Eleanor was strong enough to move. The doctor said she could go, but warned him to be careful. Any hard jolt could break those bones again, he said. You'll need a padded wagon, and you'll have to go slow. Nathan got a freight wagon and lined it with every blanket in town. Leah rode beside him, trying hard to hide her excitement. Miss Eleanor is coming home for real, she told everyone they saw. Getting Eleanor from the bed to the wagon took 4 strong people. She was pale and tight-lipped through the whole ordeal, but never once made a sound of complaint. Once settled in the wagon, she looked worn out but satisfied. Another impossible thing done, she whispered. You're getting good at those, Nathan replied. The trip to the ranch took 3 hours instead of the usual one. He had to navigate every bump and rut in the road. Leah sat beside Eleanor, holding her hand and pointing things out. That's the Hendersons' place, and there's our turnoff. We're almost home. The cabin finally came into view under the afternoon sun. a solid log home with smoke curling from the chimney. It was a working ranch, not a fancy estate, with a creek running through the pasture. Eleanor looked at it all, seeing the promise underneath its simple surface. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is a long way from anywhere," Nathan corrected. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles, town is 12. In the winter, we can be snowed in for weeks." "Good," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "I am ready for some space." They carefully moved her into the house and into the main bedroom. Nathan had made it ready with clean sheets and fresh water. But seeing her in the bed where Sarah had passed felt strange, like the past and future were meeting right there. Eleanor must have seen it on his face. "This was her room?" she asked. "It bothers you?" "I thought it would," Nathan admitted. "But all I see is you, here and alive. And right now, that's miracle enough for me." Eleanor reached for his hand. "Tell me about her someday," she said softly. "I want to know the woman who gave you Laya." "She would have liked you," he said. "You have a courage she did not. You both value the truth, and that is what matters." Just then, Laya came in with a handful of wilting wildflowers. "These are to make your room pretty," she said. They found a jar for a vase and set them on the table. It was a simple, ordinary moment, but after weeks of fear, it felt like a blessing. That night, after Laya was asleep, Nathan sat by Eleanor's bed. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Having any second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "Every single hour," she admitted. "I think about how easy it would have been to stay in Baltimore and live a safe little life. But I did not come all this way just to turn back." Nathan smiled in the dark. "No, I don't suppose you did." Outside, a coyote howled, and another answered from across the valley. The ranch felt alive and settled around them. Eleanor turned to look at him. "I cannot marry you yet," she said. "Not like this. I cannot even stand up for the ceremony." "I do not recall asking you," he teased gently. "Your letters asked, and my letters accepted. We are engaged, Nathan. We are. We will just stay engaged until you are ready. There is no rush. You are here, and we are figuring this out together. That is what counts. But what if I am never ready? What if these legs do not heal?" He replied, "Then we will figure that out too. A marriage license is just a piece of paper, Eleanor. What matters is the choice, and you already made yours." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Nathan." "Yes." "Thank you for coming to find me in that canyon. Thank you for giving me a reason to be found." Their words filled the quiet room. Not quite love, but something strong enough to build a life on. A life they were choosing, one day at a time. The future held its share of troubles, but for tonight, they had this: a man who kept his promise, a woman who crawled through hell to keep hers, and a child who believed in them both. It was enough. The next morning, rain fell in steady sheets, turning the world gray. Nathan woke to the sound of it drumming on the roof. In the other room, he could hear his daughter Laya's soft snores. But Eleanor's room was completely still. He got up and coaxed the fire back to life in the cold house. The kitchen was filled with memories of his late wife, but today they felt like a foundation, not ghosts. He brewed some coffee, the familiar routine settling his nerves. He carried a fresh cup to Eleanor's door and knocked softly. There was no answer. He pushed the door open to find her wide awake, staring at the ceiling. "Could not sleep?" he asked gently. She answered, her voice rough with exhaustion. "I could not stop thinking about everything I cannot do anymore. Things I always took for granted, like walking over to that window to see the rain, or just getting dressed by myself." Her hands clenched the quilt. "I have been here one night, and I already feel like a weight you will grow to regret." Nathan's voice was firm. "Are you done feeling sorry for yourself, or should I give you more time?" Eleanor looked at him, stunned. "Excuse me? You heard me? Self-pity did not look good on you in that canyon. And it certainly does not look good on you now with a roof over your head. But I cannot even use a chamber pot without help. And you think that makes you worthless? Nathan leaned in. Leah needed help to learn to walk and eat. After my wife Sarah died, I needed help just to get through the day. Needing help just means you are human. It is not a shameful thing. Eleanor's anger began to fade, replaced by a raw vulnerability. I just wanted to be useful. Instead, I am just a burden. You are healing, he corrected her. That is your job right now. He placed the coffee cup in her hands. And the truth is, having you here is better than the silence this house has held for 2 years. Leah is smiling again. Helping you gives her a purpose. Eleanor whispered, that is not fair to a child. I am not making her do anything. She is choosing to help, just like you chose to come here. We are all choosing to do this hard thing together. You do not get to take that choice away from us because you are afraid. Her hands tightened on the cup. I am terrified, she admitted. What if I am like this forever? Then we will figure it out. But we are not there yet. For today, your only job is to heal. Drink your coffee. Let us help you. Stop trying to write the end of the story when we are barely in the middle. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Eleanor finally took a sip of coffee and gave a single sharp nod. All right. But I have to try things on my own. I need to know what I can actually do. Fair enough. What is first? Sitting up by myself. Nathan stepped back to give her space. The effort was painful to see. She pushed with all her might, her face tight with strain, and made it 6 inches up before collapsing back onto the pillows, gasping for air. Again, she ordered. This time, she got a little higher. On the 4th try, she was almost upright before her strength gave out. Nathan caught her, easing her back down. That is enough, he said gently. You proved you could do it. Now you need to rest. Eleanor's face was covered in sweat, but her eyes shone with a fierce light. I got farther each time, she said. That means something. Something else. That you're stubborn as a Texas mule. But I already knew that about you. It just means I am not helpless. Leah appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, hair all of a mess. She looked worried. Miss Eleanor, are you all right? I heard a noise. Just doing my exercises, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than Nathan expected. Leah climbed onto the bed, careful of Eleanor's splinted legs. Can I help? Papa makes me do stretches every morning to stay strong. She showed Eleanor, stretching her little arms high. Eleanor watched her for a long moment. Do you reckon your papa would teach me? Of course Papa is a good teacher. He taught me how to ride and rope. Leah's faith in her father was total. And so, a new routine began. Every morning, Nathan guided Eleanor through gentle exercises she could do in bed. Leah always joined them, turning the work into a game by counting every repetition. It clearly pained Eleanor, but she never once complained. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Nathan worked the ranch, but he would come back midday to help Eleanor. They would sit and talk while Leah napped. Eleanor, it turned out, had strong ideas about horses, crops, and even how to build a proper root cellar. Nathan found himself enjoying their debates. They were sharp, but never unkind. You are wrong about the south pasture, Eleanor stated one afternoon, sure of herself even though she had never seen it. If water pools there every spring, the drainage is bad. You need to dig a trench before it becomes a bog. And you know all this from your time back in Baltimore? Nathan asked, his voice dry. I know this because I read about it. I studied agricultural journals before I came out here. I did not plan on arriving here completely ignorant. Most folks do not read engineering manuals for fun. Most folks are boring. Nathan let out a laugh, surprised by the warmth he felt. I cannot argue with that. Leah took it all in. She helped Eleanor with small things like fetching water or reading aloud from books. But she also knew when to give the woman her quiet time. She is a wonder, Eleanor said one evening after Leah had put herself to bed. You have raised her well. She mostly raised herself, Nathan admitted. After my wife Sarah passed, I was lost. Leah kept us going, reminding me to do the simple things. No child should have to carry that weight. No, Eleanor agreed. But maybe it gave her a strength she will need. Life does not wait until we are ready for the hard times. Is that what Baltimore taught you? To be ready? A bitter look crossed Eleanor's face. Baltimore taught me that comfort can be a cage. My parents loved me, but like a useful piece of furniture. Necessary, but not truly valued. Is that why you taught piano? To be useful? I did everything to be useful. I cooked, managed their home, and nursed them when they were sick. Useful things are kept. Treasured things are fought for. I was never treasured. The honesty in her words hit Nathan hard. He thought of all the ways people can fail one another without ever meaning to. You are treasured here, he said softly. Leah treasures you. And I do too, in ways I am still figuring out. Not for being useful, just for being you. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes but did not fall. You hardly know me. I know you kept your word when it would have been easier to break it. I know you fight when it seems hopeless, and I know you challenge me instead of just agreeing with me. He reached out and took her hand. I know enough, Eleanor. We will learn the rest as we go. The weeks passed, full of small victories. Eleanor learned to sit up for an hour, then 2. Dr. Morrison's weekly visits became less grim as her bones began to mend. The left leg is healing clean, he said one day in late September. You might be able to put a little weight on it with crutches in a month. The right one? He paused. Eleanor's face became a mask. The right is complicated. The break was not clean, and the knee joint is damaged. You may always have a limp. But I will walk? With help, yes. I understand perfectly, she said, her voice sharp as a knife. I will walk. That is enough. After the doctor left, Nathan found Eleanor staring out the window. She was tense. Go on and say it, she said without turning. Say what? That you signed up for a wife who could run a ranch, not one who will need a cane. I am thinking you have more fight in you than 10 regular people. And I am thinking the woman who crawled across that desert is not about to let a bad knee stop her. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed just a bit. You are an infuriatingly optimistic man. Well, someone has to be. You have got stubbornness covered. She finally turned to face him, her expression a mix of gratitude, fear, and hope. I want to marry you. The words settled between them. Is that so? Nathan kept his voice steady, not from obligation or gratitude, but because in 3 weeks here I have felt more myself than I did in 32 years in Baltimore. Because Leah deserves a mother who chooses her, and because you, she searched for the words, you argue with me, and do not treat me like I am fragile. I want you to marry me now, like this, broken and uncertain. I want it known that you chose me at my worst. Nathan knelt by her chair, looking her right in the eye. Eleanor Hayes, I chose you the minute I read your first letter. This just proves I was right. But are you sure you are not doing this because you are afraid I will change my mind later? I am doing this because I am done waiting for the perfect time. I want to choose something real, right now. Then we will get married on your terms. Eleanor touched his face. No church, no town ceremony with folks staring. Just us and Leah, right here in this house. Simple and honest. Simple and honest, Nathan agreed. I will ride to town tomorrow and ask Reverend Mitchell to come out this weekend, if that works for you. This weekend, Eleanor repeated, then nodded. Yes, before I lose my nerve. The news traveled through Clearwater like a wildfire. Before Nathan even got back from town, Mrs. Henderson was at the door with fabric for a wedding dress. The town was buzzing with news of their wedding. Some wanted to turn it into a big celebration, but Nathan stood firm. Eleanor wants it here at the ranch with just family. This is about us, not a public spectacle. Mrs. Henderson, a kind soul, understood completely. She shooed away the curious neighbors and arrived at the ranch 3 days before the wedding with a bolt of fabric. We cannot have you getting married in a nightgown, she announced. What is your favorite color? Eleanor paused. No one has ever asked me that. Well, I am asking. She smiled faintly. Blue. A deep blue, like the sky at twilight. Mrs. Henderson got to work, and with Leia's help, she created a beautiful dress. It was designed to drape gracefully over Eleanor's splinted legs, a practical garment that honored her exactly as she was. Their wedding day was crisp and clear. Nathan got up before sunrise and arranged wildflowers in jars around the small parlor, turning the simple room into a sacred space. The preacher arrived at noon, a kind man who had seen their family through both sorrow and joy. He greeted Eleanor with gentle respect. Leia stood beside her in her Sunday best, her face serious with the importance of the day. They gathered by the fireplace, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, turning everything to gold. Eleanor sat in her chair, radiant in her twilight blue dress. She looked at Nathan, the man who had ridden into the desert for her, and knew that their difficult journey had led her home at last. She was not a typical bride. She could not even stand next to her groom, but her eyes were full of a certainty that was stronger than any tradition. Nathan stood by her chair as Reverend Mitchell began. "We are here today to witness a promise between Nathan Cole and Eleanor Hayes," the Reverend said. "A promise born of choice, not convenience. A partnership that embraces the imperfect." Nathan hardly heard the words. He just looked at Eleanor's face and felt the strong grip of her hand in his. He was marrying a woman who was a stranger just 6 weeks ago, yet it felt right. "Nathan, do you take Eleanor to be your wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health?" "I do," he said, the words coming easy and sure. "Eleanor, do you take Nathan to be your husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health? Till death do you part." Eleanor's voice was clear as a bell, even with all the emotion behind it. "I do." Leia stepped forward, holding the little box with the rings like it was the most precious thing in the world. Inside were 2 simple gold bands. One was Sarah's, which Nathan had kept safe for 2 long years. The other was brand new, made special for Eleanor. He slid the ring onto her finger, and she put his on him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." He knelt to be at her level and gave her a gentle kiss. It was a kiss full of promise, the start of something new. When they parted, Leia threw her little arms around them both. "You are my mama now," she mumbled into Eleanor's dress, really and truly. Eleanor's hand found the little girl's hair. "Really and truly, if that is what you want, it is what I want. I have wanted it since Papa first told me you were coming." The few witnesses offered their congratulations, with Mrs. Henderson even sneaking in a cake she had baked. It was a small, genuine celebration, just how Eleanor wanted it. No big show, just a few good people watching them make a promise. As evening came, Nathan helped Eleanor to her bed. She looked tired, but deeply content. "Thank you," she said as he tucked the quilts around her. "For what?" "For marrying me like this. For not waiting until I was all healed up." Nathan sat in the chair that had become his spot. Eleanor Cole, there was nothing imperfect about today. Her eyes widened a little. Eleanor Cole. I will have to get used to that name. "Take your time," he said softly. "You have got the rest of your life to practice." She smiled, and in that smile Nathan saw the future they were building. It was not going to be easy, but it was going to be real. It was built on grit and stubborn choices. The woman who had crawled through hell had finally found her way home. The man who had given up hope had found something to believe in. And the little girl who lost one mother gained another by a deliberate act of love. It was more than enough. It was everything. And tomorrow they would wake up and start building their life, one day at a time. Winter hit early that year, burying the valley under 2 feet of white silence in November. Nathan woke up to that special quiet that only a heavy snow brings. The ranch was cut off and would be for weeks. No town, no visitors, just the 3 of them. Eleanor was already awake, propped up with a book in her lap. He was 2 months married, and he still was not used to the simple sight of her being there, in his house and in his life, solid and real. "It snowed," she said, not even looking up. About 2 feet worth. We are locked in. Good. She turned a page. I was getting tired of Mrs. Henderson's weekly visits to see if you were regretting your choice yet. Nathan looked out the window. Are you regretting it? Being snowed in with me and Laya for months? Ask me again in February. But her tone was warm, and he knew she was content. They had found a rhythm to their new life. She ran the household from her chair, and he handled the heavy work on the ranch. Laya was the happy bridge between them. But winter would be the real test. Being cooped up can strain even the strongest bonds. We will need a system, Eleanor said, thinking the same thing he was, for privacy, for space. What did you have in mind? You take the mornings for yourself. Do your ranch work. I will handle Laya's lessons. In the afternoons, we will work together. Evenings are family time. And if one of us needs to be alone, they just take the time. No explanations needed. Her clear planning still surprised him sometimes. She was always 3 steps ahead. Sounds reasonable. What about the sleeping arrangements? They had been dancing around that question for 2 months. She had the bedroom, while he slept in the loft to be near Leia. It was practical, but it felt temporary. Eleanor's hands stopped moving on her book. What about them? Winter means we need to heat 1 room, not more, he said carefully. It means we are married in name and by law, but not yet in all the ways that matter. I am asking if you want to change that, or if you would rather wait until you are more healed. I cannot, she said, her face tight with frustration. My legs still do not work right. I am not exactly... Eleanor. He knelt by her chair so they were eye to eye. I am not asking if you can dance. I am asking if you want your husband to share your bed. There is no wrong answer. She met his gaze, and he saw her wanting fight with her fear. Her hand came up and touched his face. I want you in my bed, she said quietly. In my life. But Nathan, I need you to understand. I do not know what I am doing. And with my legs, we will figure it out, he said, kissing her palm. Just like we have figured out everything else. Together. No expectations. Just honesty. Her face, a look that was followed by a hint of hope. Tonight, then, she said. After Laya's asleep, you can move your things down. The day passed with a heavy quiet hanging in the air. Nathan worked on winterizing the barn, his mind only half on the job. The other half was letting it sink in that tonight, everything would finally change. Inside, Eleanor led Laya through her lessons, but her gaze kept drifting to Nathan whenever he passed a window. Laya, with that keen sense kids have, felt the shift but said nothing. After a quiet supper, and once Leia was tucked in bed, the house fell silent, except for the pop and hiss of the fire. Nathan gathered his few belongings from the loft and carried them down. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, her hair loose around her shoulders. Having second thoughts? She asked as he paused in the doorway. Just thinking how long I've wanted this, he said, and how patient you've been while I got my head right about letting someone else into the space Sarah left. And is your head right? He set his things on the floor and began to undress with the easy comfort of a man worked too hard to care about modesty. It is. Are you ready to have your organized life all messed up by me? Eleanor watched him, and he saw her swallow hard. I reckon I can adapt. He blew out the lamp and climbed into bed beside her. For a long moment they just laid there in the dark, the size of the step they were taking settling around them. I don't know how to do this, Eleanor whispered. Nathan found her hand under the covers and laced his fingers through hers. All I expect is honesty. All I want is you. Everything else, we'll figure out as we go. He rolled toward her. May I kiss you? You're my husband. You don't have to ask. I'll always ask. This isn't about the law, Eleanor. It's about respect. Her other hand came up to cup his face, drawing him down. Then yes. Please kiss me. What? What came next was a quiet exploration, a gentle discovery of each other. Nathan had been with women before, but he put all that aside and let Eleanor lead the way. She was shy at first, but then she grew bolder. Her hands learned the shape of his shoulders and his back with a careful and determined touch. When his hands found her, she jumped for a second, then relaxed into him, making tiny sounds that nearly drove him wild. Her legs were still in splints and mostly couldn't move, but they figured out how to make it work. He was gentle, always mindful of her pain. He would stop if she flinched and change position when she asked. It was not some passionate scene from a romance novel, but it was real, and it was theirs. Afterwards, they lay tangled up together, her head resting on his chest. He traced little patterns on her shoulder as the fire burned down to glowing embers. The room had grown cold, but they were warm where their bodies touched. "Well," Eleanor finally whispered, "that was clumsy, and not at all what you must have imagined." He felt her smile against his skin. "It was better than I imagined. Because it was real. You did not treat me like I was made of glass. You made me feel wanted." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "You are wanted. You are chosen. Every single day I wake up and I choose you, Eleanor Cole." She was so quiet he thought she had fallen asleep. Then she said, "I think I am falling in love with you." The words felt both fragile and brave in the dark room. Nathan held her a little tighter. "Good, because I am already there. I have been since you told that doctor you would walk again or die trying. A stubborn woman is my weakness, I reckon." Eleanor let out a soft laugh against his chest. "Well, lucky for me, I have plenty of that." They drifted off to sleep, warm and content, building something strong in the quiet moments. The weeks after that fell into a new rhythm. Nathan would get up early to care for the livestock, breaking ice from the water troughs. Eleanor ran the house from the kitchen table with her crutches beside her. Leah sat at her side, learning arithmetic and reading. In the afternoons, they worked on projects together. He would repair leather harnesses while she mended clothes. They made decisions about the ranch as equals, finding compromises through long talks. Eleanor's strength grew little by little. By December, she could stand for 10 minutes without her crutches, though her right leg was still weak. What was left of their old life fell away. By January, she was walking short distances with a hard limp, her face set with pure grit every time she pushed herself a little farther. Nathan watched her fight for every single inch of her independence back, his respect for her growing deeper every day. "Stop staring," Eleanor said one afternoon, catching him watching her make her slow way across the kitchen. "Can't help it. You're something else." "I'm barely mobile." "That's not impressive. It's pathetic. 3 months ago, that doctor said you might never manage it. I'd call what you're doing plenty impressive." She paused, gripping the counter for support. "Do you know what the worst part is? It's not the pain. It's knowing I'm not the woman you thought you were getting. That the woman in those letters could do things this version of me never will." Nathan set down the bridle he was oiling and crossed the room to her. "The woman in those letters was performing. The woman standing in front of me is real. I will take real over a performance any day of the week. Even when real means I can't help with half the ranch work?" "What should a ranch wife do?" Nathan interrupted. "Near as I can tell, you're managing accounts I'd let turn to chaos. You're teaching Leah better than any town school ever could. You argue with me about stock and water rights until I actually think through my decisions. Sounds to me like that's exactly what a ranch wife should do." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with a fierce effort. "You are infuriatingly good at this." "At what?" "At making me believe I'm enough, even when I'm so sure that I'm not." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, tasting the salt from the tears she refused to let fall. "You are more than enough," Leah's voice piped up from the table. "Are you two going to kiss all day, or can we finish lessons?" They broke apart, and Eleanor laughed despite herself. In that moment, the last wall between them finally crumbled. They were building something real now. February brought a warm spell that made Nathan hope for an early spring. But then a blizzard hit and buried that hope under 3 feet of snow. They were snowed in again. and the small cabin started to feel even smaller. Leia got restless, Eleanor got irritable, and Nathan got grumpy. The peace they had found was starting to wear thin. "I am going out to check on the animals," Nathan announced one afternoon when the silence felt too heavy. "It is not time yet," Eleanor said, not looking up from her sewing. "I do not care. I need some air." "What you need is to stop pacing around like a caged animal. You are making Leia nervous." Nathan held back the sharp reply on the tip of his tongue. She was right, but that did not make it any easier to hear. "Fine. I will take Leia with me. We could both use the fresh air." Eleanor's hand stopped moving. "She needs to finish her schoolwork. She needs to get out and move. We all do. An hour in the snow is not going to ruin her education. But it might kill her if the weather gets worse, or if she falls through the ice on the creek, or if—" "Eleanor." Nathan's voice was sharper than he meant it to be. "She is a ranch kid, not some delicate doll. She knows this land. She knows how to handle herself in the cold. Stop trying to protect her from the world she actually lives in." A heavy silence filled the room. Leia looked back and forth between them with wide, worried eyes. "I will just—" the little girl started to say. "Stay," Eleanor said, her voice strained. "Your father is right. I am being too protective. Go get bundled up and help him. Just be careful." Nathan could feel the real argument hanging in the air. It was about Sarah's death, about losing the people you love, and about how fear can make you hold on too tight. But this was not the time or place for that conversation. "1 hour," he said. "We will be back before it gets dark." Outside, the cold air was a clean, sharp shock. Leia walked beside him through snowdrifts that came up to her waist, her breath making white clouds in the air. "Is Mama mad at you?" she asked when they got to the barn. Mama. He wondered when she had started saying that. It had happened so naturally that he had not even noticed. "She is not mad. She is scared. There is a difference." "Scared of what?" Nathan started chipping ice out of the water trough. He thought about how much a 7-year-old could understand. "She is scared of losing the people she loves. Your first mother died when you were little. Eleanor does not want to lose you too." Leia thought about this while she helped him throw feed to the chickens. "But keeping people safe by not letting them do anything is not really keeping them safe," she said. "It is just keeping them still." Well, there was some wisdom from a child. Nathan stopped working and looked at his daughter. "Where did you learn something so smart?" "Mama tells me stories about when she lived in a big city and her parents made her stay still for so long that she forgot how to move. She says she does not want me to forget." So Eleanor knew what she was doing. She was fighting her own fears even when they made her hold on too tight. The anger Nathan had felt back in the cabin melted away. "Your mama is a brave woman," he said softly. "Braver than she knows. Sometimes brave people get scared. They just keep going anyway. Like when she crawled all that way through the desert? Exactly like that." They finished their chores and went back to the cabin. Eleanor was at the stove, and her shoulders were stiff with more than just physical pain. Nathan sent Leia to wash her hands and then walked over to his wife. He put his hand on the small of her back. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" "You were right." "You are right. I should not have snapped like that. I just did not understand." He turned her to face him, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Eleanor, I know you are scared. I know it hurts to watch Leia go out into a world that took Sarah from us, but you cannot wrap her in cotton. She has to learn to be strong, just like you are." Eleanor's composure finally broke and tears streamed down her face. "What if I cannot handle this? What if I am just not cut out to be a mother? What if my fear messes her up?" He pulled her into a tight hug as she trembled with emotion. "Then you fight it. The same way you fight everything. You are not your parents, Eleanor. You escaped their cage. You will not build one for Leia. How can you be so sure? Because you see the danger. You question yourself instead of just acting like you know best. And you love her enough to let her grow, even if that means taking risks. Eleanor held on to him, burying her face in his chest, and Nathan just held her until the storm passed. He was starting to learn that marriage was not just about the good days. It was about this: standing together through the fear and doubt and choosing to stay even when you failed each other. When Leah came out, clean and ready for dinner, Eleanor had pulled herself together. The meal was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Later, Nathan found the old guitar he had forgotten about, and Eleanor went to the piano. "Play something for us," Leah said, sensing they needed it. They tried, stumbling through songs they barely knew, his rough voice and her clear one mixed in the small cabin. It was not perfect, but it was real. It filled the room with a warmth that pushed back the cold and the fear. That night, as Eleanor lay beside him, she traced patterns on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For calling me out. For seeing who I am trying to become, not just who I have been." Nathan took her hand and placed it over his heart. "We are all becoming something new out here, Eleanor. You are just the one brave enough to say it out loud." The wind howled outside, but inside their small cabin, they had found something stronger than the storm. Something stronger than any wall. They had found a partnership built on honesty and stubbornness. The woman who had crawled through hell was learning to walk again. The man who had searched past hope was learning to trust again. And the little girl who had lost one mother had gained another. Spring arrived like a promise kept, the snow finally giving way to a valley that was green and new. Eleanor stood on the porch without her crutches for the very first time. Her right leg was still weak, but it was holding her weight. She was standing on her own 2 feet, facing the world on her own terms again. "Well, look at you," Nathan said from the doorway, his voice thick with pride. "Don't sound so surprised. I told that doctor I would walk again." "You surely did. But it doesn't make watching it happen any less remarkable." Eleanor turned to face him. The movement was still slow, still careful, but it was all hers. She had earned every single painful step of the journey back. And you could see the victory in the way she held her shoulders. "I want to ride out to the south pasture today," she announced. "To see this drainage problem you keep insisting doesn't exist." Nathan's eyebrows shot up. "You haven't been on a horse since the accident." "Then it is time, unless you think I am too fragile." The challenge in her voice made him smile. "I think you're about as fragile as a roll of barbed wire. But if you're getting on a horse, I am riding with you. No arguments." "Wouldn't dream of it." They saddled 2 of the gentler horses, Eleanor moving with a slow purpose. Leah watched them from the fence rail. "Be careful, Mama," she called out. "Always am, sweet girl. We will be home before supper." Getting on the horse was the tough part. Her right leg just would not cooperate, but she managed with some grit and Nathan's steady hand. "How does it feel?" he asked her. "It feels like freedom," she said. "Like I am finally getting back the last piece of me that I lost." They rode slowly, letting Eleanor get used to the rhythm again. The valley was beautiful, all green and gold under a bright blue sky. Nathan watched her more than he watched the scenery, making sure she was all right. She sat taller and smiled wider with every passing minute. "There," he said, pointing to a soggy part of the pasture. "That is the spot." Eleanor looked it over with a sharp eye, tracking the slope of the land. "Your ditch is fighting the natural flow of the land. Dig there," she pointed, "and connect it to that old wash. The water will do the work for you. That is a week of hard digging. Well, it is a good thing we have all summer, unless you like having a swamp in our best pasture." Nathan just laughed. "Our best pasture, huh? Guess that means half this ranch is yours now, Eleanor." A soft look came over her face, making her truly beautiful. "Our pasture, our ranch, our life. I like how that sounds." They sat on their horses, looking out at the future they were building together. "Nathan," Eleanor's voice turned serious. "I need to tell you something. I should have told you before we got married, but I was scared. There is a reason I left Baltimore in such a hurry." "I am listening." There was a man, Chester Whitmore. He courted me for 6 months and made all sorts of promises. Then his family found him a better match, and he dropped me flat. Is that why you answered my ad? To get away from the shame? That was part of it. But there is more. When I told Chester I was leaving to marry a rancher in Wyoming, he threatened me. He said he would follow me out here and spread lies, tell you I was just after your money. Nathan felt a slow anger burn inside him, not at her, but at the man who tried to trap her. Did he? He asked. I do not know. I left before he could. But Nathan, if he shows up here, we face him together, just like everything else. He reached over and took her hand. Eleanor, I do not care about your past. The woman you are right now is worth 100 of him. You say that now. But he is a charmer. He could make you doubt me. He can try, Nathan said, his voice hard as rock. But he will not succeed. A canyon after you crawled for 4 days on busted-up legs. I saw you fight off fever and every reason God gives a person to quit. I've been married 5 months to the toughest, most stubborn woman in all of Wyoming. Some slick city boy from Baltimore ain't gonna change that with a pocket full of lies. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes but didn't fall. She squeezed his hand so tight it nearly hurt. I was so scared to tell you. Afraid you would think I just used you to get away. That what I felt was not real. Is it real now? More real than the ground under my feet. I love you, Nathan Cole. Not for saving me, but because you see the real me and you still choose me. Well, then, that is all that matters. The rest is just static. They rode back to the ranch, the quiet between them comfortable now. But that name, Chester Whitmore, stuck in Nathan's mind like a burr under a saddle. The trouble he represented finally rode in late one Tuesday. The sound of hoofbeats made Nathan's head snap up, his hand going for the rifle. He always kept close, but it was not danger riding up the road. It was something worse. It was a well-dressed fella on a horse that cost more than a wagon. A man who looked like he had never seen a hard day's work. Behind him was a rougher-looking type, hired for his muscle, not his mind. Nathan laid his shovel down and waited. He watched the fancy man's eyes sweep over the ranch with a look of pure disgust. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Nathan's voice was flat. The man swung down from his horse with a practiced move. "Nathan Cole, I take it. I am Chester Whitmore. I believe you have something of mine." Every muscle in Nathan's body went taut, but he did not show it. "I do not think so. This is my land and my stock. Nothing here belongs to some stranger, not something, someone." Chester's smile turned ugly. "Eleanor Hayes, though I hear she's calling herself Eleanor Cole these days. My wife's name is Eleanor Cole. It is legal and binding. There's nothing pretend about it, your wife." Chester let out a nasty laugh. "Did she bother to tell you about us? About the promises she made right before? She ran away from Baltimore to escape charges for breach of promise? Nathan had dealt with enough liars to smell the truth mixed in with the poison. He trusted the woman who had crawled through hell over this peacock looking for a fight. She told me plenty about a man who courted her, then left her for a richer prize. Told me about the threats he made when she decided to move on. Funny how your stories sound so different. My story is the truth." Chester's face hardened. "Eleanor Hayes promised to be my wife, took my gifts, and then ran the second a better deal for my family came along. That is theft, Mr. Cole. Well now, then where is the sheriff? Where is your warrant?" Nathan's voice never wavered, though his blood was beginning to boil. "Near as I can tell, you are just a sore loser chasing a woman who had the good sense to leave you behind." The hired muscle tensed, but Chester waved him off. "I do not need a warrant to take back what is mine. Eleanor will come. With me. Especially once she understands what will happen if she does not. And what would that be? Ruin. I will destroy your name in this territory, Mr. Cole. I will spread stories about your sorry marriage to a woman of low character. By the time I am done, you will be a laughingstock." Nathan actually smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "See? That is where you messed up. You think I care what strangers whisper about me? You think a reputation matters more than the woman in that house, who fought harder to get here than you have fought for anything in your entire life? Everyone cares about their reputation. Then you do not understand Wyoming, or Eleanor, or a single thing that matters. Nathan picked up his rifle, not aiming it, just holding it with a comfortable weight. Now here is what is going to happen. You are going to get on your expensive horse, take your hired hand, and you are going to ride on out of here. Tomorrow you will get on the first stagecoach heading east, and you will never bother Eleanor again. Chester's face went red with rage. You cannot. Oh, I can. This is my land, and I have every right to remove a trespasser any way I see fit. And Chester, Nathan's voice went cold as a winter creek. I found my wife half dead in a canyon. You think for 1 second I will not protect her from a coward like you? You could be arrested for threatening me. You could try, but Sheriff Morrison knows me and he knows Eleanor. Who do you reckon he's going to believe? Me or some fancy boy from back east slinging mud? The hired muscle finally spoke. Mr. Whitmore, maybe we should go. But Chester's pride was hurt. Eleanor, I know you're in there. Come out and face what you did. The cabin door opened. Eleanor stood there, tall and proud. The limp was still there, but she walked across that yard like a queen, straight toward her past, ready to face it down. Chester, her voice was steady. You should not have come. Should not have? He sputtered. Look at you, crippled, living in filth, married to some dirt farmer who cannot give you a thing. Is this really better than the life I offered? Eleanor stopped right next to Nathan, her hand finding his. The life you offered was a beautiful cage, Chester. This, she said, gesturing to the simple house and the hard land, this is freedom. This is a partner who values what is in my head, who did not run when I was hurt or difficult. You are delusional. You would rather have this than be my wife. Yes, Chester, I would. I would rather have a man who searched for me when I was dying than a man who threatened me for leaving. I prefer being a partner over being property. I will take the honesty of Wyoming over the polite poison of Baltimore. Chester's face twisted up with rage and wounded pride. You will regret this when the winter comes and you are freezing in that shack. When he finally realizes what a burden you truly are. I have already lived through the worst winter, Eleanor said softly. And I have already learned what it means to be chosen when you are at your lowest, not just your best. And Chester, I have never regretted it for a single second. This life, as hard as it is mine. Truly mine. Nathan felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly buckled his knees. This was not the desperate woman he had found. She had been broken and put herself back together stronger than before. In that moment, Chester seemed to shrink, his power turning out to be nothing but hot air. You are making a huge mistake. No, Eleanor said, her voice clear and final. I made a mistake when I let you court me. When I thought love meant changing myself for you. Coming here, choosing Nathan, building this life. That is the first real decision I ever made for myself. And I would make it again. The hired man cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, we should be going. For a second, Nathan thought Chester might do something foolish. But the man's pride was all he had. And it was broken. His pride was clearly shattered. He climbed back on his horse with stiff, jerky motions, his face a perfect picture of rage and shame. This is not over, he spat. But the threat felt empty. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice steady. It is. Goodbye, Chester. They stood and watched as Chester and his hired man rode away, shrinking down the valley road until the dust swallowed them. Only then did Eleanor's strength give out. Her body went limp against Nathan's as all the fear and tension drained away. I was so scared, she whispered. Nathan gently turned her to face him, his hands firm on her shoulders. Eleanor, look at me. Did you really think I would choose his story about you over the woman I have known for 6 months? Did you believe a stranger's fancy words could possibly outweigh what we have been through together? I did not know what to think. He is so convincing." "He is a small man trying to act big," Nathan said softly. "The kind who only feels strong when he is making other people feel weak. You grew bigger than him a long time ago, Eleanor. Coming out here just made it plain to see." From behind a tree, Laya appeared, her face wrinkled with worry. "Mama, are you okay?" Eleanor pulled herself upright, forcing a smile as she opened her arms for the little girl. "I am fine, sweetie. I was just taking care of some old business that needed to be finished. Was that man being mean to you? Papa says we do not put up with meanness on this ranch. No, we sure do not. But he is gone now. He is gone for good." Later that night, long after Laya was asleep, Nathan found Eleanor at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Letters. One to a lawyer," Morrison suggested. "I want a record of Chester's threats of him showing up here. It is better to have protection we do not need than to be caught by surprise." Eleanor put her pen down and met his eyes. "Thank you for standing by me, for not believing him, even for a second." "There is nothing to thank me for. That is what being partners is all about. We stand together, especially when it is hard." "Is that what it means to you?" Eleanor asked, her voice full of real curiosity. "Because I keep waiting for you to get tired of all the trouble. For you to decide that a crippled wife with a complicated past is just too much to handle." Nathan sat in the chair next to her, looking her straight in the eye. "You want to know what a partner means to me? It means having someone who argues about where a fence should go because she wants it done right. It means watching you fight for every bit of your independence, even when it hurts you to do it. It means seeing you stand up to the man who tried to put you in a cage and choosing your freedom." "That is not trouble, Eleanor. That is treasure. Treasure that comes with a permanent limp and a scandalous past," she said quietly. "Treasure that comes with a kind of strength most people never find, because they are never tested hard enough to need it." He took her hand and kissed it softly. "I found you after you had crawled for 4 days just to keep a promise. Everything since then has just proven what I knew in that moment. You are worth fighting for, worth standing with, worth choosing every single day." Tears finally welled in Eleanor's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She reached up and cupped his face with her free hand. "I love you, not because you saved me, but because you see me. You see the real me and you love what you find, even the hard parts. The hard parts are what make you who you are. Easy is boring, Eleanor, and you are the least boring person I have ever known." She laughed, a sound full of relief and happiness. "We are a strange pair, are we not? A widowed rancher and a mail-order bride who showed up broken and decided to stay anyway. Strange is good. It means we built something that is ours, not a copy of someone else's life." Nathan pulled her into a hug, and she leaned against him with a trust that still felt new and precious. "And for what it is worth," he said, "I am so glad you stayed." They held each other in the quiet kitchen as the world outside settled into the deep night. It was not a perfect life, and it was not an easy one. But it was real, and it was theirs. Summer came on strong, bringing long days filled with the hard work of the ranch. Eleanor's body continued to heal. Her limp became less noticeable, a quiet reminder of the journey she had survived. She learned to ride a horse well enough to help with the cattle, reclaiming parts of herself the accident had tried to steal. Leah blossomed under Eleanor's teaching. The little girl had stopped asking about her first mother. Sometime between the cold of winter and the warmth of spring, Eleanor had simply become Mama. The family was whole. In July, the doctor, Morrison, made his last visit. After checking her legs, he declared her as healed as she was ever going to be. "You have made incredible progress," he said with true admiration. "Most people with your injuries would never walk again. You proved me wrong, Eleanor Cole." "Good," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "I have been proving people wrong my whole life." After he left, Eleanor stood on the porch with Nathan beside her. Laya was in the yard playing with a kitten. I made it, Eleanor said, her voice soft. From that canyon all the way to here. From being broken to being whole enough. From being alone to... She searched for the word. Home, Nathan finished for her. You made it home. Home, Eleanor repeated, tasting the word. Yes, that is exactly what this is. She had traveled more than 1,000 miles. She had survived a wreck that should have ended her life. She had crawled through the desert with broken bones to keep her word. And through it all, she had found something more important than safety or comfort. She discovered what it felt like to be chosen for exactly who she was, to be valued for her strength instead of her quiet obedience. She learned she was loved not in spite of her scars, but because of the courage it took to earn them. The promise she had tried so hard to keep had turned into something better. It had become a partnership built on truth and tested by fire. It had become a family. What are you thinking about? Nathan's arm came around her waist, solid and sure. I used to measure my life by all the things I was supposed to do, she said. But standing here, I realize I have stopped counting. I have stopped trying to prove I am good enough. Because you finally believe it, he said. Because I finally found the people who never doubted it, who saw me at my very worst and chose me anyway. Eleanor leaned into her husband's embrace, watching their daughter chase the kitten through the sunlit grass. I was so worried about being on time that I missed the whole point, she said. It was never about being punctual. It was about being willing to crawl through hell to keep a promise. It was about finding someone who would search for you, even when it was hopeless. We are both stubborn that way, he chuckled. Thank goodness for that, she whispered. They stood together, looking out at the land they would care for and the life they would build. It was not perfect. It was not easy, but it was theirs, and it was more than enough. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.